Oh my goodness, I'm so excited to have so many people here today. We're going to go ahead and get started early. Well, not early, right on time. Last week we put a little time and space between the beginning because it was a presentation, but today is going to be a lovely conversation between myself and one of IE's favorite partners, Andrea Yacub Macek. She is the founder of AYM Consulting, and she and I are going to talk today about values, boundaries, saying no, how that helps you in your career, and clarity, which I know is your favorite topic, one that I certainly work very hard on. And I can't wait to learn more from you. The way we're going to open this conversation today is I'm going to talk a little bit about an experience that I've had recently. And Andrea and I are going to talk about how that forms and shapes what comes after it and how we can all work a little bit harder and better on where we need to go. So, without further ado, let's get going. I'm going to talk about the experience, and then Andrea, I'm going to kick it off to you, and we're going to see where this goes. So, I think you and I have been talking about having this conversation now for basically since you came on the first time, and we said, wouldn't it be great to have a conversation about coaching and collaboration, and maybe even coaching someone live? And we've always come back to it, but we hadn't figured out what we were going to talk about until at the very end of the year, something happened to me in my career. And so it all kind of just fell into place. So I was scouted by a former employer that asked me to come back. And it's not that I had a poor experience, but as I've shifted in my life doing what we're doing now, part of me felt very detached from it. Like I really didn't want to do it. But financially, I've been in a rough position because when you start any company, you're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul a little bit. You know, it's mac and cheese and frozen pizza, not gourmet. More fast food, not dine in. And so I was like, you know what, I'll do it. I need the money. I need to make it happen. And the whole time I was just like, something doesn't feel right. Something doesn't feel right. And that process dragged out for 3 months before they finally said, you know what, we don't like the perception of what you're doing. We're not going to ask you to come back. And they were the one that approached me. And I remember that first day, I felt like there was a gut punch. Like I wanted to lay down and just be like, what am I doing wrong? Why doesn't this work? And then after I just said, you know what, this wasn't what I wanted anyway, all of a sudden I started to get flooded with a ton of opportunity. And that's where all of this comes in because that was the conversation we had. So, Andrea, I have to ask, you've heard this story now a couple of times. You actually experienced it live with me because we were going back and forth about it. But I can't imagine my version of that story is dissimilar from ones that you've heard in the past.
No, and thank you for sharing that and being willing to open up your own kind of box of experiences for us to talk about and coach on. So I want to just say it is an incredibly common experience, and especially, and I'm going to speak in context of people that identify as female and women because I work with women primarily in my business. And as a almost 40-year-old woman who's been working 15 years, worked in corporate, worked in healthcare, worked in male-dominated industries, there's a lot wrapped up into what you shared, and we have shared some shared common experiences. But what you went through is very common in terms of meeting an intersection of multiple parts of your life and trying to dissect and find clarity of where does this make sense to go forward? Do I not go forward? What do I do? And so that was kind of the culmination of what you were feeling and making that decision. And two things that stood out to me, and as you were summarizing that experience this time, hearing it again, I think for the second or third time, was new clarity to offer, new takeaways. Was one, the feeling that you had. Was this the right decision? You said, I didn't really feel right, but should I do it? Should I not? And so that's the feeling that typically happens. We live in that limbo a lot of time when we're trying to move forward. And really it's being able to get still and listen to the clarity. And I'll talk about clarity in a minute of what that is and is not. But that stood out to me of, okay, that resounding gut reaction, this doesn't feel right. And then the subsequent gut reaction when you received the no from them. And even though you knew that was the correct path for you, the no wasn't on your terms. meaning you didn't say no first. And so that also creates a lot of another intersection and can create a lack of clarity, even when we know that's the right answer for us. So those two things stood out to me this time hearing it again. So I'll just offer that to see what comes up for you.
No, I love both of those call outs because you're right. I think inherently we know, and that's what this conversation is all about. Inherently, we know what aligns with us or what we want and what we value. And then we often have that in one hand, and in the other, it's this feeling of, but what about this? What about my bills? What about what I want to do, the
Right.
vacation that I want? All of those pieces. And it's finding the balance, but it's listening more to this side than this side, I think, because it's so easy to get wrapped up in playing the game rather than what you want. And Kylie and I were just having this conversation before we started. You know, had we known everything that we would encountered on this journey, I still would have moved forward with this because my life, our purpose, everything that has changed for us is so much better than I could have ever imagined. And leaving a corporate job with security and a pay that is much higher than what I'm making now, while that feels good in the wallet sense and being able to walk around and just have that security, it doesn't fulfill you in the same way. And I think that's what you and I are driving at, right? Like there's the work that you can do, and then there's the work that you want to do.
Right. So there's like the two, again, there's multiple intersections that happen when we're making career decisions. And typically it's those two main categories of what's the practical side of I have to pay my bills, I have a family, I have responsibilities, right? And then what is the fulfillment side? And so that push and pull happens so frequently when we're in career decisions or life decisions, and those intersect too. Those are not mutually exclusive. They blend together all of the time. And working with the clients I work with, who are women with, 10 to upwards of 30, 35 years of experience, that intersection of life and career happens so frequently and is more intertwined and deeply connected. It's hard to tease it apart. So a lot of the work I do with them is looking at clarity from different perspectives to help tease that apart, to really understand, okay, if I am going to make decision A, what does that look like? If I make decision B, decision C, et cetera, down the map. And what I really want to stress, because I practice this every day in my own business as well, and my own career, what it looks like now is we can have it all. It just might not be all at the same time. And so that's the struggle we have, is we want to have it all, and I want everybody to have it all, but there are going to be times where we have to make decisions about what that having it all really looks like, and what is the value, what value am I prioritizing and making those decisions. So that's what it really comes down to.
Oh, I love how you put that, because I don't think I'd ever considered that before, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. We've mentioned clarity a few times, so I want to come back to that because that is what I call your zone of genius. You unlocked so much for me when we had that first conversation. So for those that are listening, and for me specifically, because I still struggle with it, how do you know when you've reached clarity? How do you know when something is clear for you and the other party? Because it's one thing to be like, oh yeah, no, I know what I'm saying. But then it's a completely different thing for it to be received in that same way.
Right. And I want to just kind of reconnect this back to what we're talking about, is how clarity can give you the opportunity to say no, and then move yourself forward in whatever direction feels right for you or is right for you. So clarity does not look like having 100% certainty, nor feeling 100% certain. That is not clarity. Okay. So I want to make that clear, because I think like it goes along with, I think, perfectionism is we hold ourselves to this unrealistic ideal standard of what that looks like. So that's not what it is. However, clarity looks like being able to take action without having all the information. It's being able to have minimal second guessing of yourself. It's trusting yourself and your decisions. It's trusting the action that you take will get you to where you want to be. It's making the decisions you want to make versus the decisions you feel like you should make or have pressure to make. So that's really the foundation of clarity and how I support my clients in making those decisions and clarity. Clarity also feels like that sense of steadiness. When you know you're on the right track, regardless of what it is, right? Professionally, personally, in a relationship, etc. It's that feeling of grounded and steady in any level that feels right for you, right? There's a scale that we're talking about here too when we're talking about clarity and feelings. So what level of on the spectrum are you feeling steadiness, feeling assured, feeling trusting, feeling knowing? That's also what clarity feels like. So I'll use myself as an example. I'm launching this big event next week. Do I have 100% certainty of how that's going to go or how that feels? No, definitely not. But am I clear on who I want to serve, how the support that's going to offer, the outcome I want that to have for people? Yes, I am. So I'm moving forward with a percentage of uncertainty that will always be present, but I'm clear in what that direction is. So I'll stop there.
No, that's beautifully put. And maybe it would be helpful to tie this back to the original story. So in that version where I waited 3 months to get an answer, something that I could have done knowing that it didn't feel values aligned to me could have been, and you can correct me here, this is where I'm going to really lean on you and your coaching and what you would do. I probably could have sat down and looked at my financial situation, sat down and like wrote out some of my values, like looked at what I actually wanted to do and had the time to do. So instead of doing that, I was just like, okay, I'll just leave it there and it can figure itself out. But I probably would not have had that feeling of them saying no on their terms because I could have said no on mine. Does that,
Correct.
is that about right? Am I getting it?
Yes. So, and I will say, this takes practice, and this is work that I do with my clients for usually 4 months at a time, right? We're working together in chunks of time to do this work. So yes, to go back to the values piece of this conversation as well, you know that in that season you were in and making that decision for those 3 months, that if we go back to the practical versus fulfillment, right? The practicality of that decision was some financial and other items that you were considering, right? And then the fulfillment side was, does this opportunity match up with my values? Right? So the tipping point there was, for you, I'm not sure what tipping point it was. Was it practical or fulfillment or some of both?
It was both.
It was both. Okay. Right. And then for them, same, practical and fulfillment. And the tipping point for them might have been practicality, potentially, who knows? Because they said it wasn't, well, it could have been both, right? Because there was not a value. There was a value misalignment for them. So yes, one of the ways that I do this work with my clients is I have a particular tool called the scale that I work with them on, and we map out different anchor points on that scale of values, of information, of decision points we can have of, okay, if I'm at point A, for example, this decision, and I call that balanced. What does that, or excuse me, that's acceptable. What is the very starting point of this decision? What would be good for me? Then we look at what's the middle of the road, then what's the ideal part of the road. And we look at all of these combinations of ideal and practical to help them make a decision and to gain clarity. And again, not 100% certainty, but to gain clarity to move themselves forward, if that makes sense.
It makes complete sense. And I love that. And, you know, I'm someone that didn't seek out a coach or look at coaching as something that maybe not necessarily that I didn't need, because I know I need it, but I looked at it as something that was like far away from me.
Sure.
As far as what I could access. And you've really come on here a few times now and made it seem so accessible. What was the turning point for you to, thank you. Yeah, of course. Did you have a coach, or do you have a coach now? Okay, I would love to hear you talk about it as a coach that has a coach, because for some people looking at this can seem really daunting, or like it's maybe too expensive, or it's not the right investment for them. I'm curious what your take on coaching is.
So great question. So I can touch on a few different layers of this as well. So I make the analogy often in terms of working out, or fitness or health, because typically anybody has had some touch point with that facet of their life at some point of trying to get healthy, changing their health, whatever the case may be. So if you work with a personal trainer, so if you go to the gym, there's machines, there's weights, there's all sorts of options that can get you the same results, but there's different paths that you can take. right? So you're probably going to spend more effort, more energy, more time on your own trial and error and using the machines, using the weights in the gym to get to that result. So the difference is if you have a coach come in or personal trainer come in, they're going to be able to evaluate your particular situation, your personal needs, what you value, how you want to spend your time, and maximize your effort in the gym. Same goes for a coach. So I've had a coach in my life now for almost 10 years. And I will say, I also did not understand the world of coaching until she entered my space. And she actually is a former colleague. We both left the company at the same time, and she started her coaching business, and coaching was not on my radar. And I reached out to her for help and for questions. She had been a mentor to me, and then she shared with me what she was doing. And so I decided to enter into a coaching relationship with her. So I coached with her for, I think, 5 or 6 years. And then through my own career journey, had stepped out of a full-time corporate career and then started coaching on my own. And she was the one who encouraged me to do that and gave me the clarity that coaching is a path I could see. So now, as I've been in the coaching space for 3.5 years full-time, coaching is a non-negotiable in my life. I have a health coach, a mindset coach, a relationship coach. I have coaches for all parts of my life. And yes, it is an investment financially, emotionally, with my time as well. But like anything, what you put in is what you will get out. So it is a financial investment for sure. It is again, emotional investment. It is a time investment, but I'm accelerating the path that I want to go down. I'm accelerating the results with help. I'm getting shortcuts. I'm getting, I don't have to figure it out on my own. And it's, to me, that is well worth that, because I see how much it supported my life. It supports my client's life. It's really just multiplied the benefits I have in every part of my life. And I see that the same result for my clients as well. So they're working with me for their career, but they're also, again, multiplying results financially, emotionally, in their career, in their relationships. It's trickling into other parts of their life. So,
well, no, yes, and thank you. And it's probably also impacting them in terms of like working out that muscle, right? Because when you're going to the gym and you have a personal trainer, you don't stay at that same base level, assuming you don't stay at that same base level. You're like strengthening that muscle. So they're probably walking away with skills and tools they can continue to use even when they're not working with you. I would almost make the comparison too to therapy. Because you don't have to go to a therapist just when things are going wrong or when you've been through something
exactly.
Well, because I think, right. I think so often we think of using people in our lives or building community around us in this way as something that requires a big event or a big life choice. And in reality, we need it now. Like, we need it all the time. Like, you're not just wandering around in your career specifically just a couple of times throughout your life. The data shows that we're switching jobs far more often than that, especially now. So I imagine it's super useful to engage with a coach even well before you get to the point where you need to make a change. Because if you're making a change, kind of like I was considering doing, you typically need to make it right then. Instead of,
sure.
Please comment on that.
Sure. I was going to say, so in terms of, so it helps with multiple things. So to your point, you're either in the process of making an active decision or you want to make a decision soon. And so I would say my client base is 50-50. So I have 50% of clients right now who are wanting to make a decision eventually, meaning in the next 2 to 3 months, and are working with me proactively to think through all of these things. So where are they getting stuck? What are the roadblocks they have? How to get, why are they? So we're talking about in terms of a career context, right? So to really be proactive in terms of reaching out to employers. How do I get connected to the right people, networking, getting visibility, setting myself up proactively to accelerate this search. And then for my clients that are already in the search, it's a lot of emotional support. Anybody who's been through a career experience of any kind it's emotional, especially the job search is incredibly emotional, up and down. So one of the biggest pieces of support I offer to them is they have a sounding board, they have an expert, they have a resource to come to that is just for them. That is not Google, it's not generic. It is a personalized one-on-one support system for them to get expertise, to get support, to answer questions, to ask questions. So again, when you think back to that question of why coaching, why is that something important or helpful to consider? That's part of the value as well.
Yeah, and as you're talking, what I'm thinking about is, as people that are socialized as women, or people that identify as women, I think oftentimes we do that with our friend group. And throughout
Yes.
this process, I saw yeah. And throughout this process, what I found was I started to recede from my friends because I didn't want to consistently bring the same message to them of, oh, I'm still looking. Oh, it really sucks right now. This is what's going on. And so you stop leaning on your support system because you don't want to be a burden. Do you feel that too in the people that you work with?
Yes, depending on the person. And I always coach them to continue to lean back into that support system because, you know, something I always come back to, and I can't talk about saying no and opportunities without talking about networking, is your support system is your network. And building those relationships is invaluable. It is what is going to support you now and in the future. And yes, I can respect not wanting to be that burden, but you can also approach those conversations in a different way. Rather than just sharing your experience, you can get insight and get information. So you and I have done that with each other, right? And it's, hey, Andrea, I'm going through this situation now. I'm leaning on you as a friend, but then maybe later on I come back to you and say, could you actually give me some insight? What is your experience? What have you gone through? Because as women, we talk a lot about a lot of different things, but we don't talk about careers necessarily. And we need to be doing that. It's like anything, the more we normalize the situation, the easier it is to talk about it. And so you might have to be the person in your friend circle to start to normalize the conversation and to ask those questions about pay, about networking opportunities, about your career, about getting that raise, about whatever it is. But if you don't ask, you're not going to hear an answer.
It's such a good point because you mentioned being proactive. And in this industry, we talk about that all the time because it's how do you mitigate your risks? How do you get out in front of it? And that's a
Right.
huge piece of what you do. And so I kind of want to pull it back a little bit to that story again
Mhm.
because we've talked about saying no and getting opportunities. And after that company said no to me, I started talking more and saying, this is what I'm looking for, this is what I need. And immediately I got a flood. And so I think based on our conversation and what we know to be true, had I been proactive and decided, got clarity about the situation and made the decision and been the one to say no, those opportunities could have flooded in a lot quicker for me.
Potentially, yes. And I don't want to minimize the fact that there is timing factors and all of this, right, of what's
Absolutely.
available in the market and otherwise. But yes, and that's the thing, when you have clarity and are able to really, again, align the practical side, fulfillment side, the values, all of it together, then you are coming from a place of confidence. Because clarity produces confidence in any way. It gives you, to your point, the way that you speak about yourself, the way that you present, the way that you ask questions, the information that you're sharing. Because of that experience and having gone through those interviews, it refined your clarity. It refined what it was that would make you fulfilled. It refined the way you talked about yourself and your values. And so by virtue of that, when that no came, then the other yeses entered your space because you knew and had more clarity for what it is you actually wanted, what would serve you, what would fulfill the practical side and the more value focused side for yourself as you moved into a new situation. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. And I think there's a piece here that I want to explore a little bit more. And it's the word no in general, because I think as women and people that identify as women, we're often socialized that saying no is very unkind and you try to be gracious and you try to like walk around. Yeah, like we're
You and
all
I
doing
talked
the
about
head
this a lot. Yeah, excuse
the
me.
head nod, the eye roll. But saying one of the best pieces of advice I've gotten is that saying no is kind
Yes.
because because it allows the space for both parties to understand what's going on. It's clarity, right? And it's boundaries. So I'd love to hear your response to that. But then I'd also love to hear what a piece of advice that you lean on or think about often is.
So again, I want to acknowledge that this takes practice. This is a hard thing to unsocialize and reframe your thought process around. So a lot of what we're talking about here too, I want to touch on is mindset. Right? The way that you process and perceive your situation, the way that you react to it or don't react to it is mindset. And that is something I wish I had known sooner. And I'm going to come back to your question. It has to do with this, but I wish I had known that sooner in terms of saying no or saying yes or saying yes to a value, saying yes to what makes me excited, what makes me happy. And because, excuse me, lost my train of thought for a second. It's, we are so socialized at such an early age, and then it's continued for so long as to what what things should look like, what we should look like, what we should feel, what should we not feel, the shoulds. But I always talk about the shoulds. We should all over ourselves constantly. So really the practicality and the power of saying no is so important, because you are being kind to yourself and to the other person. So if you use our conversation today, I could have said no, right? And that would have been serving both of us, because I would have said no, and you would have found someone else who is ready and wanting to talk about this topic or another topic that would have been equally valuable for your community. And if I had said no, it would have been serving me for something else that I wanted to focus on. So to your point, if we reframe and have that mindset of saying no is kind and is serving of both individuals or all individuals that are in that process, that is a really, really powerful place to come from. Instead of no is just me closing off a conversation or me just shutting down. And sometimes that is what you need, is you're closing an opportunity to go forward with something else. But that takes practice. And as I've practiced saying no more and more and more, I move past the no pretty quick. But that takes practice. And I don't want to, sugarcoat that.
No, absolutely not. It is very difficult, but what I found in my practice is that it's the same thing that you just mentioned. As I start to say no more, I'm realizing that what I'm getting back isn't hatred or vitriol or, those
Right.
extreme reactions that we envision getting, like, oh my goodness, you're the worst person that's ever existed, wherever your brain goes. It's very often like, okay, that's fine, maybe next time. And
Right.
and what you've done is shown that you're willing to communicate too. So what's a piece of advice that you lean on when you do this work, or just generally speaking, something that you find has been helpful as you've done this work with other people?
Yes. I'm going to say my answer is maybe going to be hard to digest, but the more I practice it and the more I have experienced it with myself, my own journey, and my clients, the more I know it's true, and it results in what you want. Meaning, I hear no constantly. I am a coach
Mm.
in a interesting market, just like many of those individuals who are listening who are job seekers or trying to make a career change. I hear no on a daily basis from people who want help, who want support, but are not ready for whatever reason to move forward with support, right? So I have to know and be clear as we take this full circle, and my value, what I'm going to offer to them, and what I will gain from it as well. It's a mutual relationship. Whether you're going into a career situation, whether you're going to a relationship, whether you're going to a coaching relationship, there's mutual value to be gained on for everyone involved, right? So I have to trust that no is going to lead to a yes for someone who is ready, who is aligned, who is ready to go forward. So the same we're talking about with careers. And again, we bring it back to your example of, that employer said no to you. And it was, even though you knew it was the right decision to hear that no, it was still hard to digest. But, pretty quickly in your situation, you received a lot more opportunity. And I know that's not always the case for everybody, especially right now if we're talking about career situations. So I want to honor that. But it is leading you to the right thing, because the more you hear no, the more that you continue to either reconfirm for yourself that is what you want, and you're going to make the decision to either keep going for it, or you will adjust what it is that you want because of the no. But either way, it's leading you to the direction that you want to go in, again, based on practicality, fulfillment, and your values.
I love that statement, particularly because that's something that we talk about a lot in the work that we're doing, is that recommitment, right? Like it's so easy to say, yeah, I want to do this and I'm going to pour my all into it. And we just
Mhm.
expect to see these Netflix documentary style stories where we're going to have a documentary in a few years. And, there's, there's just
Right.
that unicorn status. There's like 2 years where it's really rough. And then all of a sudden it takes off and it's wonderful. But that's, as you've pointed out so many times, not often the case.
Right.
It does take work. It does take recommitment. But every single time you recommit to that work, what you're telling yourself is, this is what I value. This is what I want. This is the path that I want to
Yes.
take. And I think what it goes back to is what you said earlier. You really can have it all. You just may not have it all at the right time. And so it's that mindset shift, right? Of understanding what is for you and when you can handle it. Because if you got all of the most wonderful pieces around you, you'd still have to choose, right? You are only one human being. You can't do all of the
Right.
things at once.
Exactly. Exactly. And again, in the context that we're talking about today, in terms of no and career opportunities or other, career life opportunities, that's exactly what's happening. So, when I think, I'll give a non-career example that maybe people can relate to. When I was dating, right? I was single for almost 10 years before I met my now partner and husband. And I really wanted to be in a happy, healthy, reciprocal relationship, right? Reciprocity was big and respected and all of those characteristics. And it took almost 10 years of dating and no's and redirecting and redefining and recommitting to that value of love and commitment and partnership to find my person. And did I want to quit and give up? Oh my God, so many times. I quit dating multiple times in those 10 years. But, I had to take a pause and refocus on where I wanted to go. So the same is applicable to your career, again, your personal life, any aspect of your life that you're trying to work on and move forward. There are going to be seasons of no's that are going to redirect you and push you into the direction that you really want to go in. And it's, again, getting that mindset of, can I trust myself? But first and foremost is really that, can I trust myself to go forward? Because we're also socialized to look externally for information rather than learning to trust. So a lot of the work I do with my clients is learning to rebuild trust with themselves, because they're so used to turning outward that they can't make decisions, have a hard time making decisions without external factors. And so we're reframing that as well.
It's such a huge lesson. I don't know which one is more difficult, and I'm speaking purely from my position, learning to say no or learning to trust yourself. I feel like they probably in many cases go hand in hand. How, and I'm not asking you to give away the farm here, but like, how do you work with somebody that is like, you can tell has really had a hard time trusting themselves, which happens for a lot of reasons, right? It could be a poor work experience. It could be a plethora of things. Like, how do you know how to redirect somebody in that way?
Sure. So to your point, it's unique depending on the client and what they're coming to me with. Um, One client now, her situation is very similar to something I went through. So I'll share through my experience because it's something that kind of reconnected deeply for me. So I think a lot of people listening or on here now can relate to this. So my client and myself, I was, and she is in a very toxic work environment, to the point where leadership is ignoring her. They're cutting her out of meetings. She feels pressured and or obligated, maybe bullied. I don't know how strong of a word to use here, to attend certain meetings. For example, she was just requested to adjust her PTO to come into a meeting last week, and she felt obligated to do that because the company is experiencing layoffs. So, it's a real situation right now, and things that just aren't, brushed aside. These are, things she's experiencing on a regular basis, and that has rightfully broken her trust with herself in terms of professional and a personal way. She doesn't know, she's not trusting herself in terms of making her own decisions. How does she move forward? So a lot of this right now is working on how can she create support for herself in this environment, knowing that there are a lot of different facets of toxicity happening to her and with her on a day-to-day basis. It's looking at, what is the lay of the land? Where are boundaries that can we create together? What are the mental space I can create for her? So a lot of it is really trying to create, and again, without going to like specific tactics, it's really looking at how to help support her rebuild in baby steps, very baby steps, to rebuild her trust with herself. So in that specific example, we worked together on, okay, we're not going to have you negotiate all of your PTO and take, remove all of your days. What does this look like? I don't want her to be doing this, but this is a real situation and a very complex situation of circumstances that we have to work around. So that was an example of, okay, we're not going to have you, again, remove all of your PTO for this, but where's a flex do you think you can mentally get on board with, knowing the lay of the land that's happening?
No, I think that's incredibly helpful because what it does is it ties that individuality very strongly in. Like you said, like you can't, two people, even in a very similar situation at the same company, are going to have completely different roadblocks.
Yeah.
So that's where the coaching piece, I think, is really strong. I want to point out to those of you that are listening that Andrea and I are here to answer questions too. Like we're definitely having a conversation with each other, but if any of you have anything that is burning in the back of your mind that you want to ask, please drop it in the chat and we can address it as well. I do want to comment on the fact that last month was Women's History Month.
Yes.
And and I know that's a major focus or focal point of your clientele. I'm curious if there's been a woman in history or current history or past history that has inspired you. And two, and we can come back to it, why you chose to focus on the niche that you do. So person that inspired you and why your niche.
Oh my gosh. So many things. This is going to be a personal cheesy answer, but my mother
Perfect.
is a huge, I guess, hero. I don't really use that word often, but I would consider that a hero. So this is a reason. There's multiple reasons for this. One, I'm also a first generation minority woman, and so watching both my parents move here from the Caribbean in their 20s, and now they're in their 70s. They've been here a long time, built a whole life. They really dare to dream and think outside of what their success could look like for my sister and I. So I'm living my mom's dream in some way. She always wanted to own her own business. She actually wanted to be an interior designer and she didn't get to do that. So when I started my business, she was just over the moon that one of her children were going to be an entrepreneur and like live their own path. And so she has been one of my biggest supporters throughout the past 3.5 years. So she's a big inspiration to me. And women in particular, it just was kind of a natural niche for me to fall into in terms of coaching. Like I said, I worked in healthcare for a number of years. It's male dominated. I'm a minority woman. This is a weird thing to say, but it's relevant. I look young for my age, and I've heard that a lot from people. I'm going to be 40 this year. But I was working in healthcare. I was in my early 20s. And so I looked like I was in college and I was running a massive practice with people that were, 2, 3, 4 times my age. And so really having to establish myself and gain credibility and break a lot of the stereotypes that were happening because of my age, because of my gender, because of my race. I had to break through a lot of those pieces to create a career and create credibility and visibility and success. So my clients deal with this on some level or on all levels when they come to work with me. So this was really important to me that I've learned how to break through a lot of those barriers and create success in different ways. And so helping other women do the same was incredibly important to me. So that's why I chose this niche.
No, I love it. Yeah. I was going to say, we do have a question in the chat and I'm going to tie that into this real quick. Because one of the things that you told me right when we first met almost a year ago or about a year ago was you're really good at helping women take a look at that resume and actually integrate what
Mm.
is on that page, because I think you hit the nail on the head for so many of us. We separate ourselves from it because there's no way that we could be that successful on paper and then also feel the way that we do. And I think the question perfectly hits on
Mm.
this. So we have a question in the chat. Any advice for a woman being told she's too much at work?
This is a loaded question, and thank you for being brave enough to ask. So that could be taken in a lot of different contexts, depending on the industry that you work in, the job that you work in, the way that you look. I hate to say that, but the way that you look plays into that, and the feedback that you're getting. So if you're open to sharing a little bit more detail, let me know. Otherwise, I will share just high level feedback. This can be uncomfortable to do, but it is helpful to have a conversation with whomever gave you that feedback, especially if it is a person who has a direct connection to your performance and your wow, it's a Monday, you guys. Sorry, my brain is still kicking in. That's a direct connection to your success and potential growth opportunity at the company. Because the fact that you're even getting that feedback tells me a lot about the culture of either just that particular department that you work in, the team that you're in, maybe not the culture as the whole company. So one would be to try to have a conversation with that person and to come from a space of neutrality, which I also recognize is challenging, meaning coming from, you gave me this feedback recently. Would you be open to sharing to me what that really means? How does that show up for you? What is it that is feeling like too much for you? And could you help me understand what that means? That is more neutral than, well, I don't understand why I'm too much. Right. And that's our natural reaction, right? We want to get defensive because we're like, who the hell are you to tell me I'm too much? Like, that's your own business, right? Like, I don't need to hear that. But if it's in a work context, I need to have you do that in a professional way that's going to serve you as best as possible in getting that clarity from that person so that you can choose if you want to shift that or not, because that will be your choice based on the feedback they give you. So I'm going to pause there. I said a lot. Let me know. I don't want to mispronounce your name. I think it's Eliza. If you have more feedback or thoughts on what I shared, or anyone else listening, if you have thoughts, feedback, questions on what I just shared.
Well, while we wait for that, something that I think is an incredible call out there is seeking that clarity. We've talked about that a few times of like, okay, good, we got the good feedback there. Seeking that clarity on what specifically is causing some friction there. And I think it's such an emotional phrase that somebody is too much, right? There's an emotional reaction there, because I have a hunch, and I don't know if you would agree with this, I have a hunch that in some cases, going back and saying why or how am I too much, they may not even have a good answer.
They may not. Right. Right. So, and if they don't have the good answer, then again, that's up to you how that goes forward, right? Do you want to continue to be yourself? And listen, I'm going to address a lot of things that are really shitty, excuse me, but are also very relevant. That this company might have a lot of problems, right? It might be, and you might already know this, an environment in which that you can't be yourself fully, which is unfortunate. That there's a lot of bias or toxicity or all of the above happening based on who you are and what's happening, and you might not be getting as many opportunities because of that. I say that because I was in a similar environment where my boss, in so many words, told me I was too much, and so I'm asking you to do what I did. And I sat down with them and had a conversation, and I was honest, and I said, look, there has been friction, because this was the third conversation at this point with my boss. And I was like, look, there's no secret. There's been some friction, but we are a team and we need to work together to be successful. So can you help me understand how we can keep refining this? What can we do differently? So I didn't necessarily look for a complete solution. I wanted a micro incremental change to happen there so I could survive the job. And that was a real situation for me at the time. I was just trying to survive at that point. So that's a little bit of what I've been through. And I wanted to share that could be, again, I know I can recognize there's probably a lot of layers happening here that you can ask for the feedback. Like we point out, you may not get the feedback. And then that might be another level of information or clarity you can take forward to figure out what it is that you'd like to do about that situation.
Yeah.
You said you think it's often code for please be less visible. That's a very valid point. A very valid point. And I'm sorry that that's the situation that you might be in. Again, this is a decision that you might have to make in terms of, do you stay here and try to break through that barrier, work with this person? Or are there other options for you at this point? So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something I love that you said was you talked about how when you were just trying to survive that job and you were looking for incremental change, because I think that's another piece that earlier in my career I didn't do. I didn't know what my end goal was. I knew that I wanted to climb the ladder or hop, or, I had end goals, but I didn't know specifically what I was doing at that moment. And I think what you said just put it in complete focus for me, which was you knew what your goal was. Your goal was to survive. So you weren't trying to, take on an extra project and then level up in that career to get a promotion. And I think that's another key piece that we need to be clear on here too, is in order to make the moves that you need to make, it's going back to that clarity piece, you need to know what your goal is, right? Oh, Andrea, I can't hear
I'm on
you.
mute, sorry.
There we go.
And I want to, and I'm throwing in a lot of different ideas and experiences here because, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Eliza is willing to share, unfortunately, in the situation that you're in, it might be just to get through the day until you can step out of this position and go somewhere else. And yes, you want to be clear on your goal. I'll go back to myself, since, we don't want to ask people to share what they're not comfortable with. In that particular situation, I had left a job I really loved, but I was burnt out and the hours were not working for me, but I loved my team. So I chose to step out and go somewhere else. And my goal was to survive. I was getting married at the time. The job was supporting me financially, but it was not supporting me mentally or emotionally or with growth. So my goal was just to get through my wedding and then look for a job. And I know everybody has different situations, different circumstances. Options are different for every person. So I'm not asking you to explore an option that's not feasible for you. I'm asking you to consider and gain clarity on your goal, given what options do feel feasible and practical for you. And that can be an alignment for you to say no and move on, if that's an option for you. Does that make sense?
It does. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the chat for any questions that anybody has. And while we wait for those, I'll give you, well, because nothing's really a fairy tale, but I'll give you like the where we're at now with the Elisa story that we started with,
Yes,
right? Which,
please.
like, I had no idea what was going on. They said no to me, and then there was grief and aggravation. And it's scary being in a liminal space. That was a word that I learned recently, and liminal is transitional space. So anytime you're in between point A and point B is however you those assign. That said, I'm walking dogs. I'm doing some contract work for an agency that I loved. And is it lucrative? Absolutely not. But you know what it does give me? The values aligned piece. I get to go outside and get endorphins from puppies. And I get to set who's upset about that? And the second piece is I have flexibility. I get to keep doing what I love every day, which is this. And being here with you and talking to people and talking about these topics that when you and I were first starting out in our career, Andrea, like we didn't have people having these conversations.
No, definitely not.
And I would have loved watching them, especially early in my career, because I think it would have nourished me in a way that I knew that I wouldn't be alone, and that I knew that there was going to be support. Because I think as women or people that identify as women, we often kind of recede into that space.
Yeah.
Julie, there is a question. Will the recording be available after the session? Absolutely. Thank you for being here too. But yes, we're going to be able to do a recording. We'll send it out this week. We have an email to go out with it as well. Any other questions?
And
from anybody?
Meg.
Oh, go ahead.
Hi, Meg. We saw you come off your or come on video. So come back on and say hi. Not to call you
I
out.
wanted you to see me clapping because Alyssa, I appreciate the transparency. I don't know who else is on here, but this whole entrepreneurship thing is no joke in terms of the mental gymnastics and the pull to go sort of back to corporate and it's just this reminder that like everything is a trade-off. Like there is no perfect scenario and we're allowed to change our minds and we're allowed to test the waters and we're allowed to say yes and then say no. And I just love you both so much. And I've been like in the background making lunch and, but I feel like I've been with you for a cup of coffee that's been long overdue. So thank you both.
Well, thank you. And we love you. Thanks, Meg.
Yes. Thank you so
And
much for that. Go
I'll,
ahead.
I'll
Andrea.
echo that. I'll echo that. I've said no to a lot of things in my career and since becoming an entrepreneur. I think 8 months into my entrepreneurship journey, I had a very big carrot dangled in front of me for a multiple six-figure job to go back to corporate. And I'm not going to lie, I paused for a second and considered it. But it was the trade-off of, do I want to give up the flexibility? Do I want to give up my passion and the expertise that I know that I offer to women who need this support, who want this support, who I'm making this accessible to? Like, do I want to give that up for a period of time? And the answer was no. And I've since I'm tested probably once a quarter if I want to go back in some way. And for 3.5 years, I've managed to say no and continue to happily say no, as we're talking about, to stay in the lane that I'm in. And I've have to shout out to both of you, Meg and Elisa, for having me, because these two have very much supported my business and my visibility for 3.5 years to make sure I support communities like this. And it means so much. So that is the power of saying no, is you get to align with really amazing women who are going to have your back. So that is why we're having this conversation, because we want all of you to be able to say no and say it with conviction, and with confidence, and practice doing that. So it leads you to the yes that you want.
No, and I also want to say thank you to Meg and Andrea, because you've both been there along this journey. And what I feel is so powerful about conversations like these is that there's support that comes with it. This isn't a one-time thing where Andrea and I are like, oh yeah, we'll hop on and have a Zoom conversation for an hour. We're texting each other, we're emailing each other, we're constantly referring each other to other people. And I think there's something to be said about that network that you can build for yourself. And it comes from getting clear with yourself, saying no to the things that don't serve you. I think for me, for much of my career, and even now as I'm retraining myself, right? Because you're not going to get it right all of the time. It's very difficult to look at your current situation and go, oh my goodness, I'm panicking, I need to fix it. You don't need to fix it. It just doesn't look like the way it did before. And I think that was something that you pointed out so beautifully. We're winding down to the end of the hour, and I want to make sure that you get some time and space to talk about what you're planning on April 14th at noon Eastern. So how can people engage with you? And we are going to send out an email with this recording and more information to Andrea. But in case you're watching this on the YouTube channel or somewhere else, Andrea, how can folks engage with you? And then tell us a little bit about what you have coming up on the 14th.
Sure. Thank you. I first want to say thank you to you, your IE team, everyone here. Julie, I recognize you from LinkedIn. We've exchanged several messages. So thank you for being here. Eliza, thank you for sharing your experience. So I'm on LinkedIn all of the time, minimum 5 days a week. So please find me, connect with me, ask me your questions. Let me know if I can support you. Happy to connect with anybody watching it live now or on the replay. And then to help you continue to say no to things that aren't serving you and to say yes to things that are, I am running my signature networking masterclass next Friday, April 14th at noon Eastern time. And it is going to be 75 minutes of instruction and strategy, and then minimum of 15 minutes of live coaching and support from me about networking, and specifically how to accelerate your career and your job search through networking. I have built my career through the power of networking. Fun fact, I've secured every single job and promotion through the last 15 years through networking. And so I've tested this, it works. I coach my clients on this. So I want to open up my toolbox essentially to show to all of you and to get you networking the smart way to really accelerate your career path again in your job search. So that is next Friday, April 14th.
Amazing. Andrea, as per usual, it's been an absolute joy learning from you, hearing from you. I learn something new every time. I had to run to write down. Clarity is not 100% certainty. So if you don't take anything else away from this call, that would be the one that I would write down. Thank you all for attending. If you're watching it live or in the recording, please do reach out to either myself or Andrea. We're happy to engage with you further. And we'll go ahead and end this 5 minutes early. Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. So appreciate it.